Hello FTC Alberta. It's time to talk a little bit about components and joints and how we're going to actually put some stuff together in Fusion here to start building some of your dry bases, projects, pieces, whatever it might be. Basically, this is going to be about how do we join components together. Also, how do we create a custom component with a really basic extrusion. We're going to get to that towards the end, which is not usually we start with that, but because we've got some libraries of parts that we can already use, we can actually play around with that. So the goal is to get to something similar to what you see on the screen here, basic X-drive robot with some Omni wheels and 4 motors on it. Something similar to this is kind of where we're going to go with it. Now, I've already set up my file structure. You'll notice that this is that Alberta FTC CAD challenge, Climbing High, that I created for myself and a few of the mentors that are in here. And basically, I've created a few files that I've named properly, and I put my part files in. Now, the parts I'm going to use today are going to be Studica's new building system. I quite like this system. I think it's a really cool thing to put together, and it should be something that's available for you relatively soon here. And that being said, any skills that you learn from this, they're perfectly applicable to Rev and Tetrix kits. Go build whatever you happen to be doing. I'm going to show you how to do a custom part. Now, this is a custom part, this blue panel at the top, that I would build on a laser cutter. That being said, you could also do this on a mill, a CNC machine, if you wanted to cut it out of polycarbonate, let's say, but lasers are rather easy to make work in this sense. That being said, let's get started. So to start this off, I'm going to go into my main folder here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a brand new file, new design, and I'm going to save it. You do have to save it before you import parts into it. I'm just going to call this way demo X drive, something nice and descriptive so we can get to work. Now, before we started this, I actually have a couple of files here. You can see them at the bottom. I've actually put some wheel modules together. So I've taken a few parts and I've joined them. We'll show you how to join things here in a moment, but I actually have done this with this module, which is the one that matters. Okay, this one has a basic motor on it. This is using Studica's Maverick, but it's the same form factor as the Tornado or DC motor from Rev. And basically, I've just put an Omni wheel on the front. Now, if I want to see what the rest of this looks like, I can actually go into my file hierarchy or my browser, and I can actually click the eye, and the eye is going to let me turn the motor or turn the item off so it just disappears. Now, that means I can't edit anything to do with that piece, but it also means I can see behind it if I have to. So in that case, I can see that, yeah, I've put a motor mounting bracket in here. It simply bolts into this plate. You can see the holes for it right there. And then I've put my Omni wheel on the end, and it actually bolts on with a set screw, which you can kind of see sneaking into there. Cool. So we're going to make use of this in our other project. So I'm going to save this, make sure it's all up to date. Then I'm going to go back to my X-Drive demo. I'm going to go down to that wheel module that I just modified, and you can see it's still spinning here and loading, and I'm just going to drag it onto my screen. Now, it is going to bring the entire assembly in, and you can see that that whole module has showed up top here, and if you open it up, you can see that it includes all of those other parts that I used to build it. Okay, so there's all my parts. This module is its own sub-assembly, and in this case, right when you place it, you have the opportunity to move it around your screen, and you also have the chance to rotate it. In this case, I do have to rotate this by 90 degrees to get it where I want it to be, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, cool. There's my first wheel module. Now, in order to build the X-Drive, typically you want some sort of framing to go with it. And in this case, we're going to try to build an octagon so that we have flat fronts and sides to make that work. I'm going to use a bunch of flats for that, and I'm just going to go into my part file. I'm going to grab those flats right now. So I'm going to go down, and it's not exactly the size I want to do this out of necessarily, but I'm going to use 2 different parts here. I'm going to drag a flat of 5 here. At 90 degrees. I'm going to spin it around so it's approximately in the right position. This one is easier if it starts there. Then I'm going to grab a flat that is 3 units wide. I say units. Those are the mounting patterns that go onto a lot of the parts here. And I'm going to spin that around. 90, and I'm just going to spin this around. Where this one sits is less important because we're going to be messing around with the constraint and the joint. Now, one thing you're going to notice in here is that if I grab parts of this motor, it's actually going to fall apart, and that's not good. I don't really want that. I'm actually going to undo this, what I just did, and I'm going to actually select my wheel module first. I'm going to right-click it, and then I'm going to make a rigid group. And it's going to say, you want to constrain these components? Yeah, I actually do. And I'm going to press OK up here in my rigid group. You can select other things to go into your rigid group, but what that's going to do is let me move this whole object as a solid piece, so pieces don't go flying all over my drawing. Every time you import a sub mechanism, you're probably going to have to click that rigid group button there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the joint command, and this is up here in the assembly, and joints come in a bunch of different styles. In some CAD programs like Inventor, you have to select your kind of joint or constraint beforehand. Fusion's a little different in that sense. It's going to ask you, oh, I just realized just for a moment here that I actually grabbed the wrong flat piece here, the wrong size. I actually wanted 5 main mounting patterns. I only got 4. So I'm going to go up to my 192 here, which is the name of this one, 192 millimeters, and I'm actually going to delete it in the browser. And you'll notice that makes it just straight up go away. I'm going to go down and just make sure I get the correct piece, because that will cause problems long term if I'm trying to build with the wrong sized piece. So let's make this proper and correct. 90 degrees, there we go. I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can see it. I'm now going to press joint. Joint at this point, I'm going to click capture position, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on this motor assembly. Then I'm going to go back up to the top of this plate here, and I'm going to click on the top of the plate. And what you're going to see is it's going to try to join those two together. The default kind of joint, if I go to motion, is a rigid joint. That means that the two are bolted together. Now you'll notice that I used the really big hole. There's a 1/4 inch hole in the middle that sometimes we use to bolt things together, but usually we use these smaller holes along the mounting pattern. That's okay. I find the big hole, using that as the joint to be rigid, is a lot easier than trying to use the smaller ones, as they're a little harder to line up. And really, in reality, you would be putting 4 metric bolts through this to make sure that this all sat together. Once I'm done with this, I can actually go to position. I could move this around on the joint. If I had to realign the joint slightly, if it was an offset joint, if it was rotated, anything like that, I could actually edit that in here. Lucky for me, it actually lines up exactly how I want it to. And you'll notice that it pulled the motor onto the piece. Now these two are going to move as a solid piece. If I want to stop that from happening, what's going to happen is I want to click on my wheel module, I want to right click on it, and I want to ground it. Any parts that are grounded, and you can see grounded because there's a pin running through the part here, any parts that are grounded are actually not going to become movable. You can see that I can move this piece, but I can't move this piece. And that is basically going to mean that everything's going to move to this piece instead of it moving around. Which leads us to our second joint. I'm going to grab this here, capture position, and I'm just going to grab and join this smaller piece onto here. Now we're trying to make an octagon in this case. So I'm actually going to click on the bottom part of this cylinder here, and I'm going to click on the top part of this cylinder here. And now you'll notice that that piece is going to move onto the grounded piece. And they try to line themselves up, which isn't actually what I want. I actually want a 45-degree turn. Now if I turn it, you can see that if I click on the top of my view cube here, I can actually see that all the holes line up. That's good. That's exactly what I want in this case. I'm going to finish that and I'm going to press OK. And now what you can see is that I've got 2 pieces bolted together. If I just copied this over a bunch of times, and we can do that really easily by grabbing, let's say, all of these pieces, pressing Control-C or copy and Control-V, we can actually create multiple copies of this and just rotate them 90 degrees. At this point, I'm going to have to rigid group all of these things in order to join them back together. But by doing that 4 times, I will have a working model of an X drive that I could really easily build with the parts I have. Now let's back up a sec here, because at this point we're trying to get to this robot where we've used a custom piece to put this all together. And I'm actually going to jump back over to this drawing here, because in this drawing I've already got the bottom pieces of this all done. I'm noticing something right now. Right now, I've got a whole bunch of these little yields, or these little warning signs here. They're saying that the component is out of date. I clicked save on my wheel module, and so Fusion right now thinks that I changed something on the wheel module. I don't think I did, but I'm going to go up here to the top, and I'm going to get all of my latest files using this button up here. It's going to go back into your database, and it's going to update any files that you may have changed or moved or messed around with. Again, I don't think I changed anything on this, so nothing should happen, but it's going to clean up my drawing. You'll notice that all of these things have a link next to them. That link means that these parts don't actually exist inside of this drawing. They are references to a drawing that exists somewhere else. In this case, they exist somewhere in my parts folders, my parts bins. Now you may also notice that right at the bottom here I have a part called Component 1, and that's what we're going to create right now. I'm actually going to go to Component 1, which is my top plate, and I'm going to delete it. And I'm just going to make it go away because we're going to redraw it. And you're going to see it's going to disappear here in a second once Fusion catches up to me and it finishes loading. And we're going to use 2 tools here to make that happen. Now you'll notice that what I have is exactly what we just created. It's simply those brackets joined together with motor assembly attached on top, and they're all put together now. This is a solid piece here. I've pinned the first wheel assembly together so that it won't move, and now we can put a top plate on it. Now, if any of you have access to a laser cutter or CNC or anything of the sort, custom fabrication of parts is relatively easy. Heck, with the size that this robot is, you could theoretically 3D print this top plate too if you really wanted to. So how we're going to do that is, in the drawing, we're going to actually build this using a sketch. Now, sketch is a 2D drawing, and we're going to start with our 2D drawing. Now, when you click sketch, it's going to bring up what's called the origin. The origin is these panels here. Each of these represents an axis, all right? They represent the ZY, XZ, and XY axes, depending on which, planes, depending on which direction you want to look at. And those terms come from math. You've learned them in math class, so I hope you can apply them here. Now, in this case, we don't really want to actually build this part on any of those axes. We actually want to put it right on top of this part right here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and click on this piece right here. And what you're going to see is it's going to rotate to a top view. It knows to align along a plane along the top of those wheel mounts. You'll notice that my wheel mounts aren't quite on center. That's okay. In reality, if I were to build this robot, I'd probably reverse a couple of them and balance it out. But for now, this will do. It'll make do with what we need to. Now, at this point, we can actually start drawing. You'll notice that your tools at the top of your screen have completely changed. The ones we're going to focus on right now are in the Create and Modify section, because we have access to some really cool stuff here. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to float down and I'm going to realize that I can actually select the mounting pattern on this plate. Now, that is actually really useful because it's going to allow me to actually build stuff based off of this. I can also extrude these holes into the plate that I'm going to be working with. I can delete these pieces. So let's say I don't want the inside of this plate, which in reality I don't. I can click on the lines and press delete, and I can actually just make them go away. They will just simply cease to be part of my drawing. And what I'm going to do now is design the top of this plate. To do this, I'm going to use what's called construction lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to float over the line that already exists on the side here, and you'll notice that when I float over the center of the line, it actually gets a little triangle in the middle of this bar. That means that I have hit center, all right? And I'm actually going to center it across the center of this, and I'm just going to float across and confirm that if I float all the way across, and you'll notice that the line wants to snap to center, or 0 degrees, sorry, in this case 180 degrees, okay? You'll notice that I can see that that runs directly through the other side. So both of these are on center. It just means that one side's a little asymmetrical to the other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a line over to the side here. But you'll notice that I can't snap to this side. That's because this other side doesn't exist in this sketch yet. We're going to use a tool here called Project. Now you'll notice that my Project button is up top here. It's already on my toolbar. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you go into Create, you're going to see that Project is way the heck down here at the bottom. And I use Project a lot in the kind of work that I do. And you may find tools in AutoCAD in these menus that you use a lot. To add them to your menu, you just simply go to the 3 dots to the right, and you actually can check off to pin it to the toolbar. That's going to actually move it up top here. So let's say I frequently use the point tool, which is another one I do actually use quite frequently. If I click here, I can actually pin this to my toolbar, and you'll notice that I now have a point tool up top. I can customize my Fusion 360 to do whatever the heck I need it to do. I'm just going to make my parts file go away for right now. But what we're going to do is we're going to project, and we're going to click on this piece. Now you notice it highlights whatever I click on. This is simply going to draw a piece of that part into this plane. Now I need this one, but I kind of want to illustrate that idea to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a part that doesn't really align with this plane at all. I'm going to grab this black wire right here, and I want to show you what this does. So once I press OK to project, what I can do is I can actually use my view cube, and you can see right there that those lines that I selected on the black wire are now projected in this plane. If I rotate around, you can see they're kind of up in the air. They are aligned with the top of this piece here, because that's the sketch plane that we are drawing in right now. I'm going to go back and delete them. I don't need those. I also don't need some pieces of this. The piece that I really need is to make sure that this line on the edge here is in place and is correct, because what I'm going to do is draw a line from the center of it over to the center of this side. Now, why would I bother putting a line across the middle of this? Because I'm actually going to be trying to find the dead center point of this robot, which, as you can see, I can snap to in the middle of this line. This line, however, is a real line. It's going to cause problems when I start to draw things. It's going to start to segment off the middle of my robot, and that's not something I really want. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to go over to my sketch palette, which you may have to open up. It may look like this on the side of your toolbar, and I'm going to check construction line. Now you notice that makes that line go dashed. That means that line is no longer influencing anything in terms of cutting shapes, in terms of being able to extrude, in terms of all of my next steps. But it does exist here for me to measure things from, or to. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to measure a point right to the middle, and I'm just going to put a point in the middle. You'll notice a little black dot will show up. That's going to let me do a few unique things that I kind of badly need in the next few pieces of this. Now that I've got that, I can actually go back, and I've realized that I probably don't need large pieces of this. I'm just going to delete that part of the sketch, and that's not entirely important, but I'll show you why I did that in a moment. So now I know that I've got the center of this. I know that I've projected out some of the shapes, in this case the pattern that I want to actually use to mount this plate to the robot. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually array these around in a circle. So watch this. We're going to go to create, and I'm going to go to a circular pattern. Circular pattern requires objects and a center point. So the objects I want are this actual pattern right here to actually select. So I'm going to grab the hole here. I'm going to grab some of these small holes on the side because they're really cool to mount to with M3 screws in this case. Good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually also going to grab this line on the outside. And that's going to be the outside of my part of my drawing. I may as well have a few more of them. They can't really hurt. Now it asks for the center point. So now I click on the center point, and that's going to allow me to click on the point that I created. Now, you'll notice that when I click that, I randomly had some drawings show up here in kind of the top left corner. Why is that? That seems weird. Hey look, there's another one in the bottom left. If I scroll down my screen a little bit, I realize I've created 3 objects. This is actually kind of useful because I actually want 4, and that's going to realign all of them with here. But let's say for the sake of argument I wanted 8. I could put 8 here, and you'll notice that I now have these shapes showing up in different parts of the screen, all arrayed around that central point. In this case, I only want 4 because I'm really just using this to mount this plate onto this main robot. So let's actually finish that. Now the next step is I actually have to draw the rest of this plate itself, so I have an outline to extrude out. I need to define the outside of my shape. So depending on how I want to do this, I think I'm going to do a plate on the inside of this robot right now. Actually, no, you know what? We'll do the inside of the robot. Very simply from here, I'm just going to grab my line tool. I'm going to grab a line from, let's say we draw a line from here, and I'm going to draw a square out. If I float over one of these points that now exist, you can see that I can create a perpendicular line, or a perpendicular line to where it ends, and I can actually create a perfectly vertical line here, and a line here. Scroll it out. That's going to give me a square in the end, if all is well with the world. I'm going to join that up there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other corners, just to make sure that I have all of this sorted out there and there. And once I've defined a full shape here, then I can go ahead. I just realized I'm grabbing the wrong side there. Once I have that shape, I can actually float over this, slide over till it's vertical. You'll notice that the actual distances and angles of your lines show up in the dynamic input, which is the term for the little thing that you see that's constantly changing as I change the length of my lines or the angle of my lines. There we go. Now I have a nice square. You notice that highlighted itself. It highlighted itself because it is now a closed shape. And we could do all sorts of things if I wanted to get fancy with this. If we wanted to start, let's say, projecting some lines here, we could do that. We could also start playing with the idea of maybe the trim function here. Trim function is going to allow me to cut some lines out of the way while in most cases keeping a solid shape, and that's going to let me actually create something that is going to have the shape I want. When your drawing is done, you're going to go over here to Finish Sketch. And when I finish my sketch, you'll notice that I now have a 2-dimensional sketch existing on top of my robot. It's right now transparent because it doesn't quite exist yet in 3 dimensions. It's a 2-dimensional drawing over top of what we're doing. And so that's not very useful for us in robotics. But when we click the Extrude tool up here in the top, we are now able to extrude this object. Now we get some options over here. We can actually extrude in a symmetric way. We can extrude in both directions from the sketch. We can do 2-sided. We also have the option of doing 1-sided, and also selecting which side we go to. The most important part of this, though, is right now, the operation that this is doing is creating a new body. We don't really want a new body right now. It's going to add it to an existing part. We have some other options here. We could join this to an existing body. That's going to cause huge problems because it's going to try to fuse this new part we're creating onto the parts that already exist. What we actually want is a new component. New component is going to create a brand new part within this drawing that we can then work with. At this point, we're going to define our distance. You can click and drag if you want to, but it goes in 1/2 inch increments. The material I have in the lab that I often use is 3/4 inch plywood for this sort of thing. There are smaller versions, but 3/4 tends to be pretty beefy for robot bodies. And so I'm actually going to set this at 0.25 inches. And that is going to let me create this top panel for the robot. Now I can see that I've got the bottom part of the robot, I've got a top panel for my X drive, and I have a way to bolt these on. But I just realized I got a couple things. First of all, I really like making sure that my CAD models look good. So let's take this and right-click it and actually make it so that it's the correct color. I'm going to go down to Appearance, and I'm going to get my Appearance menu showing up here. Now your Appearance menu won't have these different options here. I created these earlier. But it will have this Fusion Appearance library at the bottom. So let's create a brand new color. I'm actually going to make this one red. I'm going to go down to Plastic, because, you know, maybe I do this out of plastic, and I'm just going to drag ABS White into my workspace here. I'm going to right-click on ABS White and click Edit. I'm actually going to just rename it. You can name it whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it ABS Red. And then I'm going to just take my slider over and set this to red. Done. You'll notice that turned red. Once I click on this, I can actually click and drag and drop it onto a part to change the color of that part. That's the easiest way of redefining what things look like in Fusion. Obviously, there's different options here. If I wanted to make this look like it was metal, like steel, I could absolutely do that. You notice it has a little bit of reflective shininess, but probably made out of plastic, possibly made out of plywood painted a color, such as life. There's my panel, but I just realized there's another problem. Problem in this case, if I look on the bottom, is I've got these 4 beefy motors, which are awesome, but in doing so, I don't actually have a way to get the wires to the top of the robot. Can I modify this plate, this panel, to actually do different things? I can. And it actually comes down to editing the sketch itself. So I'm going to go up to my Sketches folder in my browser. I'm going to open it up, and I'm actually going to double click on Sketch 1. Oop, I think I have something selected that I'm not supposed to here. Hang tight. Oh, my Appearance menu is still open. I'm going to close my Appearance menu and see if I can edit the sketch. When I double click on this, it takes us back to our very familiar Sketch menu. Now I realize I want a hole in the middle of this chassis so I can run wires up to my expansion hub. I'm going to click the Circle tool, I'm going to click on my point, and I'm going to make a 2-inch hole in the middle. Now you notice that that circle in the center here, okay, is now right in the middle of this drawing. If I click Finish Sketch, what's going to happen is a whole lot of nothing. That's correct. That's good. Nothing weird happened there. Because remember, when we defined this extrusion, the piece we pulled out, we actually defined it as that entire shape. And that circle wasn't included in it at the time. But you'll notice down on the bottom of Fusion, you've actually got all of these different actions. These are all the things we've done to this robot. It includes things like rigid groups, joining things. They're all listed in the timeline at the bottom. And you can see that my sketch drawing is right here, and that my extrusion is right here. I'm actually going to right-click on my extrusion down here and click Edit Feature. And you'll notice that it goes back to that menu we had when we created the extrusion. And it asked, what was your profile? It said it had 2 things selected. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reselect the profile. If I click it, I can unselect it. And I can also unselect the middle. And that's going to create a brand new extrusion that when I click, when I click on OK here, it's going to create the hole in the middle there. I edited the extrusion based off of a change to the sketch. Now, if the sketch changed the overall dimensions of the body, the overall shape, it would automatically update those things and it would automatically change the shape. It's a good way if you need to add things, you need to create new holes on the thing to add different parts. That's a good way to edit your parts to make sure that they actually function. So in review, what we've gone through is we've gone through how to build a subsystem or a sub-assembly and actually bring it into a larger assembly. We've gone through how to join things together to make sure everything connects using rigid joints. We've also talked about how to create custom parts using the extrusion tool and some sketches to actually put this robot together. This is a basic X-Drive robot. This one's pretty small. It would actually work pretty well for this particular challenge, depending on if you found a way to lift it up a podium. But with all things considered, I hope you're having fun with AutoCAD. I hope you're having fun with Fusion. And I hope that you have taken this project wherever you want. Leave any comments as to what the other things you need help with are in the Discord, and we can actually put more videos out like this so that we can show you how to build bigger and better CAD things. Cheers.